Welcome everybody to the Managing Stormwater at Home webinar. As most of you know, this was meant to be a in-person workshop at the Pennypack Trust, but unfortunately, due to everything going on, we changed it up and we're doing a webinar instead. So we're happy most of you could still join us. The topic tonight is managing stormwater at home, and now that we all have quite a bit of time at home, hopefully you can take a lot of the things we learned tonight and apply them right away to your house tomorrow. Or you can even start tonight for some of the things. So we're really excited to do this for you. And it's a learning experience for probably most of us. We're used to doing these presentations in person. But now we're doing webinar. So thankful to Zoom that we can do this. We see most of the people. You can ask questions live. Yeah, so it's a really cool piece of technology. It looks like we're still have everybody here, so we won't waste any more time. We'll get started right away. So tonight, this is a joint presentation, joint webinar. My name is Kevin Roth. I work at the Pennypack Ecological Restoration Trust, and I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator. I'm here with Lindsay Blanton from Wissahickon Trails, and she's the Water Program Manager for Wissahickon Trails. I'm here with Ryan Newman. He works at the Tookany Tacony-Frankford Watershed Partnership, and he's the Upstream Conservation Leader. We all work very closely together. Most of you probably know us through the Delaware River Watershed Initiative, the William Penn funded program to preserve and protect the Delaware River watershed. So it looks like, looking at the list, a lot of you are stream keepers. So you already know a lot about us, and you've seen us in person many times. Yeah, so we carried over that partnership from the DRWI into our daily lives, our respective watershed organizations. And it's proved to be a very fruitful partnership, and we really like working together. So yeah, those are our presenters. We're happy to have most of you with us. So before I do go any further, I want to make sure everyone knows what they're doing on Zoom. As you can tell, you can mute yourself. Most of you should be able to tell that you can mute yourself, and you can also turn on and off your video. So I'm looking over at the group chat now on the participants. It looks like most of you already have your mics off and your video off. Feel free to turn your video on, but please do keep your microphones off until we get to the question PowerPoint slide. So throughout the presentation, we're going to have questions. At that point, we'll stop, and you can ask your question either on the microphone, or you can use the chat icon at the bottom. So if you scroll to the bottom of your screen, a little window will pop up, and there's a chat option. So you can hop on the chat, and you can either message me privately or Lindsay, or you can message the whole group. I recommend keeping it on the whole group. So anytime you do have a question, we're not at a question slide, you can type your question in, and when we get to the questions, we can go back to your question. So if everyone can go to the chat right now and just give a thumbs up or I know how to do this, just something to know that you know how to use the chat option. I'll wait for a second while you guys do that. Behave tonight. Okay, thank you. I see most of the people see that option, but if not, just type your questions when they come. And also, there is also a reactions button at the bottom. So two spaces over from the chat button is a reaction button. So I can click thumbs up, or I can clap my hands, that kind of stuff. So these are just ways that you guys can stay interactive during our webinar. We don't want to just be talking at you. We like you guys to be involved, ask questions, participate, and make this like a fun experience for everybody. So again, this is Kevin, Lindsay, and Ryan, and we're happy to do this presentation for you. So tonight we're going to go over a lot of different things. So just some background on obviously who we are and what is a watershed and things like that. Then we're going to go into what stresses the watershed, why we're doing what we do, why being a good steward of the environment is important, and then we're going to lead into what you can do at home exactly. So this workshop was meant to be a more of an informational session that led you to other workshops that we're hosting in April and August and throughout the summer. So we're going to go through a lot of different things tonight. We won't go crazy into detail on any one specific thing. This is meant to be just options for things that you guys can do at home, and then attend workshops later on that go more into detail. Does that make sense, everybody? I want to see a thumbs up. Practice the reactions. All right, saw a couple. Perfect. So obviously, yeah, that's what we're going to go through tonight. We're going to go through green stormwater infrastructure, native plants, lifestyle changes, and just a whole host of things that you can do at your own house and with your own lifestyle that can make a positive impact on the environment. So thank you guys for having us, and I'll pass it on to Lindsay.
All right, guys, happy to have everyone with us tonight. So we're going to start with just a little bit of background. We throw the word watershed around a lot and assume that people know what it means, but we like to define it because sometimes people don't know what it means. So a watershed is an area of land where every time it rains or snows, all of the water that falls in that geographical region drains to one water body. So one common water body. I like to use the local examples of like Edge Hill Road or Ridge Avenue. These are all kind of watershed dividing lines that have been named as such. So on one side of Edge Hill Road, the water drains into the Pennypack, and on the other side of Edge Hill Road, the water drains into the Wissahickon. So it's basically just, you know, a geographical kind of delineation of, you know, peaks and valleys. Watersheds are also kind of a nesting thing. So you can get really small into, you know, specific tributaries. So I might live in the Sandy Run, which drains into the Wissahickon, which, sorry, there's a train near my house. The Sandy Run drains into the Wissahickon, which then drains into the Schuylkill, which drains into the Delaware. So the watersheds get progressively bigger and bigger, but no matter where you are, you're always in a watershed. It's also important to remember that a watershed is not just the actual water that's flowing in the creeks and streams. It's also the land that you're on. So the land that the, you know, rain is draining over also affects the creek. Different land uses, whether it's agriculture or commercial or residential, all these different land uses actually affect the water. So the watershed is not just the streams, but also the land. So these are our local watersheds in the suburban Philadelphia area. If you can type into your chat box now, if you know what watershed you live in, type it on in. So these regional partners are part of the Delaware River Watershed Initiative that Kevin mentioned. Essentially, the Delaware River Watershed Initiative is a large collaborative funded by the William Penn Foundation, and it's all to promote and improve water quality. So there are geographical areas where there's lots of good work being done, projects and outreach, and Philadelphia is one of those areas. So we have the Pequessing Watershed, Pennypack, the Tacony-Frankford Watershed, the Wissahickon Watershed, and the Darby Watershed. The areas that aren't actually outlined and colored in, some of those smaller areas drain either directly to the Delaware or directly to the Schuylkill. So you might live just directly in the Schuylkill Watershed or Delaware Watershed if you're in parts of Bucks or Montgomery. So we like to start with the water cycle. It seems basic, but it really does feed into a lot of the things we talk about later. And kind of prime some of those keywords like, you know, infiltration and groundwater recharge. So essentially, you know, the water cycle, we all learned it in science class. Water evaporates up, precipitates back down, soaks into the ground, goes into our surface waters and streams, but also our groundwater. So in natural environments, where it rains, the water soaks into the ground, right? And that water recharges our groundwaters and our water table. The less the water soaks into the ground, the more it becomes runoff. So here is a picture of kind of a natural condition on the left and a more developed or suburban urban condition on the right. We hear the word impervious a lot, or impervious surfaces. So essentially runoff is just precipitation that's coming off of these impervious surfaces. On the left-hand side, we have a natural condition. It could be forest or meadow or fields. And when the rain falls, it actually soaks into the ground. So you have a larger arrow over here in subsurface flow, a smaller arrow on surface runoff. In a more developed condition, like we have on the right, we have a bigger arrow for surface runoff. So rain is hitting roofs, roads, parking lots, driveways, sidewalks. All of these areas are impervious, so water can't permeate into the ground through these surfaces, and that makes this runoff greater in any area we have development. So here's another graphic just illustrating the same thing. In a natural condition, we can have up to 50% of the water that's falling when it rains or snows soaking into the ground. So some of it is going shallowly through the soil, and some of it penetrates deeper and might recharge our groundwater. So that's 50%. In a more urbanized condition, the less water that soaks in, so we have all paved surfaces and houses, that water can't get into the ground, and so it's all coming off as surface runoff.
Okay, so now I'm gonna just take a little bit of time to explain how residential properties fit into the patchwork of what we do. So as individual organizations, we do a bunch of larger scale restoration. So we do things like rain gardens or riparian buffers, which we'll explain what that is a little bit later as well. Also things like restoring wetlands too. So we do these larger scale projects at places like parks, schools, and other public places. But realistically, the work that we do can't be fully achieved unless we have the help of everyone. So if you look at this map here on the right, you'll see that big sort of llama-looking blob highlighted in black with the green and red. What that is the TTF, the Pennypack, and the Wissahickon watersheds all mashed together. And what that graphic is meant to show is all of the areas in red are where land use is residential, and all of the areas in green are other different types of land uses. So that might be commercial or industrial, or things like wooded areas or water or utilities, different things like that. So if you look at the pie chart to the left, you'll see that residential land use takes up over half of the land use of all three of our watersheds. So it's almost 55%. So it's a large chunk that we need your help to manage. So different little things that you can do at home will help us to better address stormwater issues as watersheds as a whole.
Yeah, so looking at that map, that should be pretty inspirational to all of you, because if everyone in those in all that red spots did what we're talking about tonight, and if any of you read Dr. Doug Tallamy and his book, Bringing Nature Home, it's exactly what he talks about, and in his new book too. I forget the name of that right now, but Dr. Doug Tallamy talks about this exactly, and talking about how if homeowners all did something at home, we could really make a difference. And that map truly illustrates that. Thank you for making that map, Ryan. Wissahickon, TTF, Pennypack, and the others in the Delaware River Watershed Initiative, we received a grant to do what we call StreamSmart. StreamSmart is the Stormwater House Call program. It's a free program that we use to assist homeowners in assessing their properties for ways to better manage stormwater through these best management practices, which we're talking about tonight. So each of our organizations has a small focus area within our watershed that we're trying to install as many projects in these small areas as possible to make it a noticeable and measurable impact of water quality. And the StreamSmart is just another way to help us do that. So thanks to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, each of our organizations have funding to go into these focus areas and then go to residential homes, talk to them about different things they can do, then even help them somewhat financially to put these projects in. So it's a really cool program, and we've all made great progress with it. Several homes already have rain gardens installed. Several other homes already have bioswales installed. And I know there's many more to be installed this spring and throughout 2020. So it's a really exciting program. The types of projects that we installed during the StreamSmart program, or the projects that we encourage people to install, are all going to be talked about tonight. So trees and riparian buffers. We'll talk about what a riparian buffer is for those of you that don't know. Pervious paving, rain barrels, downspout planters, redirecting your gutters, rain gardens. There's a whole host of things that you can do at your own house to improve stormwater management and to hold that water on your property so it can recharge into the ground and then be released later into the system. But these are all the different types of projects that we're going to talk about through the rest of the presentation. So this is our first question slide. So far, I've been monitoring the chat, and I didn't see any questions. But if you do have a question, you can turn your microphone on now, ask that question, or simply type it. What is a bioswale? That is a great question. A bioswale is meant to capture rainwater and kind of slow it down and hold it in place as long as you can before getting it to back to the creek. So a rain garden holds water from anywhere from 24 to 48 hours and holds it in spot. A bioswale is more of a conveyance to slow the water down a little bit before it gets to the back to the creek. It takes out pollution and other things like that. Was I spot on there with the?
Yes, and we will get to some photos and descriptions of all the different project types a little later on. But yeah, we do feel conscious of all of the different jargon words that we have in this in this arena of work.
Yeah, we know that we live in a bubble because we do this stuff every single day. So if you do have a question on what is a bioswale or what is a watershed again, please ask, because we know that we live in a bubble for a lot of stuff, and we talk about it all day long with each other. So yeah, just ask your questions. I think we're going to move on. I don't see any questions right now, but continue to use the group chat to ask your questions.
All right, so we looked a little bit at runoff and impervious cover and kind of why that happens in more suburban areas. We're going to go over a little bit about what effects that has on the stream, why it's such a kind of unhealthy, undesirable condition for the stream. So urban runoff is the #1 source of pollution for suburban watersheds. There are lots of other sources of pollution, but urban runoff and all of the things that result from, adding impervious cover and development are really significant stressors to the creek. So the best way to really understand urban runoff and how it affects the creek is by thinking about water quality and water quantity. So in terms of water quality, we're thinking about how clean is the water that gets to the stream and why, and what has it picked up along the way. And for quantity, we're thinking about all of that water when it rains, instead of soaking into the ground where it would move more slowly, it all moves to the creek very quickly. So in terms of quality, everyone, interacts with roads and, private streets all the time. And we see a lot of these storm drains, like you see in the picture. Most of these lead directly to a creek. Some of them in older areas, like in Philadelphia, do lead to, wastewater treatment plants, and it's all combined. It's like a combined sewer system. But most of them in the suburbs lead directly to a creek. And the issue that presents, obviously they're all there to prevent flooding on roads. When it's raining, it gets the water off the road quickly, and that's its job. But the water that does go into these sewer grates can bring, trash, fertilizer, gas, oil, road salt, anything that's on the ground, cigarette butts, anything that can be picked up and moved by water is carried to our streams. And so in terms of, urbanization and development affecting water quality, it's really in those rain events where we should all think about, what can be picked up right now and brought to the stream. In terms of water quantity, I think living in this area, we've all seen our fair share of floods and flooding. If you have a particular memory about flooding, if you were there for a particular tropical storm or hurricane, feel free to put it in the chat. The photo on the right is a photo of Morris Road. These are both photos from the Wissahickon. The photo on the right is from Morris Road, and this is actually pretty recently, in the last 10 years, I believe. I don't remember which storm this was, but completely the creek, rose up out of its bank, out onto the streets, and over to, this is right in front of Germantown Academy, actually. And the photo on the left is of Fort Washington. So this is kind of the business park industrial area in Fort Washington. I don't know what year this is from, but there have been many, many storms where Fort Washington has looked like this. It's a lowland area, kind of where the Sandy Run flows into the Wissahickon main stem. So there's a lot of convergence of water and it goes under. It's development just in the wrong spot. So I also have another example with live video, not live, sorry. It was once live video. This is the parking lot of the Wissahickon office. So if you've ever been to visit us, you'll recognize this is the parking lot and the bridge over to the trail. And the Wissahickon just flows like gently, quietly in this bank. You can't even actually see it from the parking lot in this picture. However, in 2014, so not even too long ago, in the spring, we had a huge, huge storm that brought the Wissahickon up out of its banks into the parking lot across all the trails. So this is a reality that we all have in suburbia, and it is common not just in the Philly suburbs, but in all suburban creeks, because when we add lots of impervious cover and the water all runs off of our, homes and streets and parking lots all at once when it rains, we get these flashy creek conditions. So this is a classic sign of, suburban creeks, flashy flooding. Oops, I'll go back one. So as a result of these, flashy conditions and lots of high volume, we see a lot of effects in the creek. Stream bank erosion is something that, for those of you who go out and monitor, your stream keepers and creek watchers, we see erosion everywhere, even in really small tributaries and headwater areas, because a lot of these small, creek areas aren't meant for high volume, but as we develop more and we have more runoff coming to these areas, it's almost like the creek experiencing like a 50 or 100 year storm, but way more often, so like multiple times a year. So the erosion of the creek banks is making the stream channel more vertical. So this is what we call a channelized stream. Instead of being really connected to the floodplains where it's a gradual U, the stream or creek will be channelized. So that means it's getting stuck in this like straight channel. It's disconnected. We also get from this kind of vertical erosion, lots of vegetation, and trees are taken out. Trees can fall into the creek. And the stream banks widen over time. This means less shade on the water can heat up. So we have all kinds of issues that come as a result of this high volume, this really erosive flow that we get. We have a cute little picture of a caddisfly on the left. This is one of those bugs, or we call them macroinvertebrates, that you might have heard us mention in the past. these little critters live in the creek. So they live, you know, on different habitat in the stream, in the bottom of the stream bed, on, you know, rocks and logs. And when we have these really high flows, so if you can imagine being like a tiny little bug in the flood that we just had in the last slide, they get totally washed out. Their habitat is, you know, washed away in matters of hours. So it can be really, really difficult for the actual ecology of the stream, really bad for the habitat of our streams when we have these big rain events. So what we're going to talk about for the rest of the presentation is really like, how can we help this situation? What can we all do at home to kind of mitigate the damages? We can't go back to, you know, an undeveloped suburban Philadelphia, but what we can do is kind of change this idea from a gray funnel. So taking, you know, all of the stormwater and kind of directing it through, you know, our pipes and stuff to streams. How can we mimic a natural environment where water would have soaked into the ground, moved slowly to the stream over, you know, the course of a couple hours instead of a couple minutes? So how can we mimic getting water into the ground, holding it, filtering it? So these are the techniques we're gonna suggest. Does anyone have any questions on creek stressors or flooding or anything like that? I'm gonna go back a little bit. I don't know if we got any other questions. Rita asked, what is that critter? And that was a caddisfly. So a lot of the bugs that live in the stream, you know, have one form when they're in the water. They're, you know, have an aquatic stage at the beginning of their life, and then they hatch out to, you know, bugs and, you know, flies that we all know and love. So, you know, there are caddisflies and mayflies, and we don't have stoneflies here, but people who fish may know stoneflies. So all of these critters start in the water. And so if our water isn't clean or we have really flashy conditions, we can have those bugs that the food chain relies on. Okay, I see no other questions, so we are gonna move on. But if you have questions while we're talking, feel free to write it in the chat and then we'll get to those on question slides. Okay, so we talked about those impervious surfaces. So if you imagine in a bubble, this is your house. You've been spending a lot of time here the last week or so. So when it rains, like it did yesterday, you have the rain hitting your roof and kind of going into your gutters. Depending on where you live or how old your house is, your gutters might go directly underground, right out to the street or to a storm drain, or, you know, your gutters might go down your driveway or, you know, into your backyard. When you finish this webinar, it is fun to go look, because some people never think about it, where do all of my gutters go? Just walk around your house, see if they go underground, see where they lead. Then you know where all the water is going. So this is what we want not to happen. We don't want that gray funnel of all of the water moving off of your property and into the street and the streams. We want to do the green filter. So we want to keep the water on your property, you know, let it soak into the ground, filter. So we're using techniques that hold the water. So things like rain barrels, rain gardens, native plants, all of these things are going to help you enact the green filter that we need across our watersheds. So here are some of the things that you can do. We've mentioned rain barrels and rain gardens, also redirecting your gutters. These are all things that we generally call green infrastructure. So that's, again, the green filter idea of just mimicking nature. But you can also rethink landscaping practices, plant trees and shrubs, and think about habitat benefits of how you structure your yard. So we're going to go into all of these in a little more detail.
So I'm going to touch on now one piece of green infrastructure that's pretty common, and more you sort of see it, is rain barrels. So the purpose of rain barrels, sort of, if you look at the diagram to your right, is that they disconnect the flows from our rain gutters to basically slowly release the water. So the good thing about rain barrels too is that that water can be repurposed. You can use it to water flower beds. You can use it to wash your car. The only thing, if you are going to use it to water like vegetable gardens, you want to make sure that you do get the water checked to make sure it's safe. But rain barrels are a pretty common, pretty inexpensive feature. And so I'm not going to go too far in depth with rain barrels because we do have a rain barrel workshop coming up soon that we'll refer to a little bit later as the slides continue as well. So another different type of green infrastructure that is also something that you can do at home that does require a little bit more effort and possibly more resources, which we can link you up with as well, is putting in a rain garden. So what a rain garden is really is it's an area that's, especially in our cases in Montgomery County, we have a lot of harder compacted clay soils. The infiltration, and what that is the water seeping through the ground isn't that great. So what we'll do in a lot of cases is excavate out these harder clay soils and bring in a mixture of sand and compost and softer soils that water can infiltrate through easier. And we'll fill that, and then we'll also plant native plants as well. And then water is redirected from whether it be a driveway or a sidewalk or even the rain gutters from your house into this garden, and it filters through the plants and then seeps into the ground and infiltrates. So if you're looking for some more information on that, we do have a workshop on that coming up in like the August area for more specifics on that as well. So here's just a few examples of rain gardens. So the picture on your right is a picture from the StreamSmart program that we had mentioned earlier. So this rain garden was planted in the fall, and it doesn't look as good as the one on the left, but it will eventually look like that. So they planted a mixture of 4 or 5 different native plants in that rain garden, and it takes some surface flows from the yard basically and slows down the flow of the water as it heads towards the creek. So a lot of these native plants too that you can put in a rain garden can be very beautiful too. So we're going to talk specifically about a couple native plants that you can put in your yard, or even specifically in some other features as well that'll attract a lot of native plants and animals to your yard as well. So here is bioswales. So bioswales, as we mentioned earlier, are sort of similar to a rain garden to an effect. So what they are is the sides of them are bermed up, sort of like a rain garden where it holds water. But the purpose of a bioswale, rather than infiltrating most of the water, is sort of to convey the water or move the water to a specific point where it can then discharge. So it's planted with native plants, so you can see down the center line there. And effectively, the native plants then help to filter the water, slow the velocity of the water, and slowly release it back into the system. So it's not that massive rush of water across impervious surfaces. So here's just the sort of info about the workshops we have coming up. So we have a rain barrel workshop coming up on April 21st. So for that workshop, it was originally going to be another workshop during Earth Week at the Pennypack Trust, but it's seeming like that's going to be a webinar. So the link for that event is actually in the chat right now if you're interested in signing up for that. So that is coming up. And then also in August, there's going to be a rain garden workshop that is happening over at the Pennypack Trust as well.
So I also saw that Rita posted a link to order a rain barrel from TTF. Feel free to post in the chat. I forgot to mention, if you have one of these green infrastructure tools on your property right now, feel free to tell us what you've got and if you like it. I see a question from Deborah. Is the bioswale the same as the bump outs that the city of Philadelphia is doing at many rec centers? So yeah, the bump outs are basically, you know, a curb cut that go into some kind of rain garden or bioswale along the streets. So that is a really good way of, you know, still getting water off of the street so the streets aren't flooding during rain events, but instead of going right into a storm drain, they're going into one of those green areas to, you know, filter and slow down before going into the storm system. So yeah, the bump outs are like a rain garden or bioswale.
So to give a little more on that too, bump outs in the city of Philadelphia, since there's such limited space and so many hard surfaces, there's a lot more subsurface elements to it than just like your standard suburban bioswale. There's a lot more happening underneath that's more engineered in bump outs in the city of Philadelphia.
Okay, any other questions at this point? Again, you can find the rain barrel workshop registration in chat, as well as a link to order your own rain barrel online. Okay.
So just sort of, I guess, as a preface here, does anybody, if they want to put in the chat, do they own Streamside property where the creek might go through your yard, or a piece of property that you own? So I'm going to talk a little bit about some different strategies that you can employ on that property if you do have stream front property as well. So one of the most basic of those that really does not require any effort at all and is really cost effective is just not mowing up to the edge of the creek. So if we look at the picture on the right there, you can see the creek and they mow right up to the bank of the creek. So one of the things that you can immediately notice with that is that there's a lot of erosion happening. There's some steep sides to the bank of the creek. So why that's happening, obviously there's still grass there, so it's not bare dirt. Turf grass itself only has about a 2-inch root system. So when a large rush of water is flowing through that creek from these impervious surfaces, it's just sweeping away the bank quickly. Some other sort of negative effects of mowing right up to the creek like that is that there's no real filter area. So there's no like plant wall that sort of the water goes through and it filters or stops trash from going into the creek. And also you don't see any tree cover or shrub cover over the creek there as well. So that's affecting stream temperatures. So during the summer, a small stream like this can fluctuate during the day, like anywhere from 5 to like 7 or 8 degrees Fahrenheit, which is a pretty big swing if you think about it. So having that native tree and shrub cover over top can help to reduce temperatures as well. So another thing that I'm going to sort of jump into now is riparian buffers. So we haven't really mentioned what they are yet. We've kind of left you in suspense. So what a riparian buffer is it is a creekside planting of native trees and shrubs that just helps to shade the creek and reduce those temperatures, also filter water as it's entering the creek, sort of act as a barrier to the creek. The root systems can help stop erosion and hold in the creek. And also these native trees and shrubs can help to provide habitat for native species of birds and animals, as well as insects like butterflies and whatnot as well. So we have 2 pictures here. The one on the left is a picture of a riparian buffer that we had planted in someone's backyard back when we initially did a buffer program in 2014, 2015-ish. And to the right is a recent project. We planted a riparian buffer, and that is part of the StreamSmart program. So we planted about a dozen different native trees along the creek there as well. So some of the common trees and shrubs that we plant in riparian buffers, we plant a lot of smaller understory trees. So we plant some red buds, flowering dogwood, black gum, willow oak, and then also for shrubs, we do arrowwoods, dogwoods, chokeberries as well, all native species. And because they're native species, they grow easier and they provide a lot of other benefits as well. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about native plants in general, why native plants are better than invasive plants, and then I'm going to talk specifically about 6 or 7 different native plants that we use in a lot of areas and talk about what they might attract and where they might be good as well. So native plants, as you can read here, they're better adapted to the soil and sort of the amount of rain that we get in the region. So they don't really require watering, they don't require fertilization, and they have a deeper root system as well, which I'll talk a little bit more about as we progress through some of these slides. So here I have a couple pictures of some native plants and some butterflies, which a lot of these native flowers, as you can see, are beautiful, but they do also attract some very beautiful butterflies as well. So on the left here, we have some New England aster, which is the purple flower there that we do plant, and I'll talk a little bit more about. And we have a monarch butterfly on top of that. And then to the right, we also have a variegated frailty, which is another species of butterfly on a purple coneflower as well. And so I'll sort of use this time too to talk about why native plants are better than invasive plants. So invasive plants themselves can sort of outcompete a lot of other plants. So if you look at both of these pictures, you see more than one species of plant, more than one species of flower in the pictures. Native plants, oftentimes, if you look on the side of the road, you'll see vines just covering the entire side of the road. They'll outcompete everything else, and they don't really provide good habitat for native species. Native species don't really eat them, and they also really don't do much for water quality benefits as well. So there's a lot of negatives that can be associated with invasive species, and native species are easier to care for, and in most cases are very beautiful as well. So here I just have a brief slide to sort of talk about the root systems of native plants versus invasive plants. So if you see on the left of this slide, you'll see non-native plants. And one thing you'll notice towards the center line, you'll see where it says turf grass. So you'll see that has the smallest root system out of everything there. So like I said earlier, it has about a 2-inch root system, and it really doesn't grow well in areas that have a lot of high foot traffic or a lot of water that flows through. Shaded areas, it sort of struggles to establish. And some of our other native plants have a little bit deeper root systems, but they also don't necessarily help as much to contain soil as well. So a good example of how native plants can be detrimental is knotweed is a invasive plant that grows along stream beds and along the side of creeks. And what that is basically is when a big rush of water comes and it floods, that knotweed will get ripped right out of the bank and a bunch of soil will go with it because its roots are so shallow, so it can have an even bigger detriment. So just to talk a little bit about some of the benefits of native plants as well, they have a lot deeper root systems. So they can have root systems that are as much as 8 to 10 feet, some of the native grasses and plants. And what that does is it helps to better break up the soil. So we have a lot of compacted soils where water doesn't infiltrate as well. These deep root systems help to break up that soil. Water infiltrates better, and there's better oxygen flow in the soil as well, leading to healthier soils overall. So now I'm going to jump into some specific plants that we plant and talk a little bit about some of the things that they attract, when they flower, and also where they grow good as well. So the first one you'll see here is the picture on the left. So you'll notice, first off, a tiger swallowtail butterfly on there. So that plant itself is wild bergamot, and what that is commonly referred to is bee balm. So it's a pretty popular native flower. It is pretty beautiful as well. So it's a member of the mint family. So it's very aromatic, and you can eat both the plants, like the flowers itself, and the leaves as well. Some people will even make tea out of it. So it has that sort of brightly colored whitish to light pinkish flower with it, and they bloom from midsummer through early fall. And some of the things that they attract are ruby-throated hummingbirds, swallowtail butterflies, skippers, sulfurs, as well as a lot of native bees. They're very important too as well. And so this plant grows like 1 to 5 feet tall, depending on how much you want to like cut it back or anything. And it thrives in sun to partial shade. And the flowers also make very nice flowers to bring inside if you want to cut them as well. So then pictured on the right here is another native plant that we typically use a lot in like rain gardens and bioswales. This is a plant that likes to have its feet wet. So what that is it's blue flag iris. And so it has that sort of bright purple petals with it, with the yellow towards the center of it. And so hummingbirds really like blue flag iris. And so that is a early bloomer. So that blooms starting in May. It's one of the first plants that we usually see bloom at our projects, and it goes through July. And then also many native species of bees enjoy this flower as well. And so this grows to about 2 to 3 feet tall. It likes sun to partial shade. And so an interesting fact about the blue flag iris is that the roots and the rhizomes of the plant, like everything underground, is toxic to humans. So do not eat it. It's not safe to eat. So next I'm going to jump into two other flowers we have here. So one thing you'll notice too, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of these flowers that we have here that are native flowers are really beautiful and they'll go nice, add a lot of color to your garden. And so many of them flower at different parts of the season too. So you can have some stuff in your garden that blooms in the early spring to midsummer, and then some midsummer to even later fall in some cases as well. So the first flower that you will notice here is on the left, that is coneflower. And so specifically that is a purple coneflower. So purple coneflower is the most common kind of coneflower that people use. There's a bunch of other different colored coneflowers you can use as well. But coneflowers grow about 2 to 4 feet tall, and they bloom from midsummer to mid-fall. And so in mid-fall, they really attract a lot of songbirds. So your like goldfinches and cardinals and whatnot, stuff like that'll come and they'll eat that big seed head you can see in the middle. When it dries out, there's a lot of good seeds that songbirds like to eat there. And so some common species of butterflies that are also attracted to that are fritillaries, which was that one butterfly that was on the first slide on the right. Also monarchs, painted ladies, and swallowtails as well. So the picture on the right here is a picture of New England aster. So that's that sort of bright purple colored flower there. And so there's a bunch of different varieties of aster, but we typically use like 2 different varieties. So we'll use this New England aster in a lot of our buffer plantings. And then also in some rain gardens and areas where there's a lot more shade, we'll throw in some woodland aster as well, which is similar to that has like white flowers and it does better in shade. So the New England aster grows to about 3 to 6 feet tall, and it does well in full to partial sun, and it blooms from August through October. So when it's still blooming in October, it's a critical source of food for monarch butterflies as they're starting their migration to Mexico. And also crescent pearl butterflies, also it's considered a host plant for them as well. And like I said, many species of birds similar to the coneflower also like to go to these New England aster as well. So the next slide here, we have a couple different flowers. So the first thing you'll notice on the left is the caterpillar on the milkweed. So milkweed is a native species of flowering plant as well. So it's most well known, obviously, because it is the one plant that monarch butterflies will eat. So that's a monarch butterfly caterpillar right now on there eating it. But one thing that's also important about milkweed itself is that over 450 different species of bugs utilize milkweed. So it's not just for monarch caterpillars as well. And so that grows to about 5 feet tall, and it has light pink flowers when it does bloom, and it blooms from like June to August, and usually it'll grow in clusters as well. And so the sap to milkweed, if you ever break it open, it's that milky sap. A lot of people know that's toxic as well. And so the next plant we'll talk about is on the right there. And so you'll see on that plant a little butterfly there. So that is a type of skipper. It's called a peck skipper. So that's one of those other butterflies that I mentioned is attracted to some of these plants. There's various different kinds that have a lot of bright colors and are really cool looking. So New York ironweed is the plant there that it's actually on. And so that grows to about 5 to 8 feet tall. And it has like a reddish to like darker purplish color, like it is on that flower right there. And so that blooms in August and September, and it does well in full sun with moist soils. And it attracts a variety of different butterfly species. So skippers like the one that's on there, swallowtails, and like I mentioned earlier too, with the coneflower and the aster, a lot of those birds that like to eat seeds as well are also attracted to the ironweed. And so the middle picture there, which is the last flower that I'm going to talk about, is the black-eyed Susan. So that is a pretty common wildflower too. It does pretty well growing in full sun sort of, and on the edges of like meadows and whatnot as well. So that blooms from June to October, grows about 1 to 2 feet tall. And like I said, it grows really well in full sun, in dry to like kind of moist soils. And so that attracts those seed-eating birds, but also it attracts like the only species of pollinating wasp that we have in the area. So they're called blue-winged scolidae. So they are the only real wasps that actually act as pollinators. They're pretty attractive to black-eyed Susans. And some of the butterflies that it attracts are those skippers and also checker spot butterflies as well. So I think now we're going to drop into a question and answer session. So I do see that we have a lot of questions here in the chat. So we will start to work through a couple of these now then.
Yeah, the first question I saw from this section was from Rita, and Rita asks, "What if only weeds are near the creek? Do they still filter water?" That's a good question. One, I think we should define weeds. Weeds to us, actually, to me, means invasive species. So your Japanese knotweed, your Oriental bittersweet, your multiflora rose, those kinds of things. I can only speak for one of them, honestly, and that is Japanese knotweed. I know for a fact that it doesn't really filter pollution, and it also doesn't hold the soil into the creek. That's the only one I can speak to. Can Lindsay or Ryan touch on anything else?
I think generally, like Kevin said, you know, it depends what you think of as a weed. Like people think of dandelions as weeds and other things that we have. So generally, as a riparian buffer, as, you know, a streamside buffer, you always want to have kind of a mix of, you know, shrubs and trees and ground cover if you can. But if it's just in your yard and you don't, you know, have a lot of leeway to, you know, create a big forested buffer, you do want to use native plants with deep roots. Some people will even use more woody plants like willows. Willow staking banks holds a bank in really well. You never want to use just like, you know, a shallow rooted plant, even if it's really pretty or it's, you know, some kind of tall wispy grass or flower. The goal of the riparian buffer is to hold the creek. So you'll, you know, whether you consider it a weed or an ornamental or whatever it is, you're going for deep roots. So I wanted to mention, Julie had also said after we were talking about bump outs that there are some bump outs that TTF manages at Juniata Park that they can show you, or you can go tour on your own. TTF is part of Soak It Up Philly, where they are managing rain gardens in Vernon Park in Germantown and along Cayuga Street in Juniata Park. Other questions we had. Kevin put a link to Doug Tallamy's book, Bringing Nature Home, in the chat. Thank you, Kevin.
So I also see above that too, Julie had a question about where are like these pictures from. So all the pictures of native plants that I showed there are pictures that I've taken when I'm out in the field at our different project sites. So we have on our website a map, we have about 18 or 19 different project sites in Montgomery County at TTF. The Pennypack and Wissahickon have also wonderful areas you can go to as well. So if you're ever curious, you can go on our website and look at these projects. And most of them are on like public parks and areas where you can go and see. But all these native flowers and stuff, you can see in examples at these projects. And you can also see a bunch of wonderful butterflies and different native species like that as well there. And so now too, I'll put in a plug for iNaturalist, which is the app you can get on your phone where you can take pictures of all these wonderful plants and different insects and get help IDing them. So coming up in April around Earth Week, we're going to be doing a lot with iNaturalist as well. If you're curious about more information for that, you can email me or message me as well.
I think all three of our organizations are doing something.
Yes. So luckily, iNaturalist is something that you can do while also socially distancing. So you can go out on your own or with your family and spend time in nature and ID as much as you want. Alex asked, does the fact that non-native plants have shallower root systems also help them spread or get established more easily?
Well, yeah, but let's take lesser celandine, for example. Leicester Celandine used to never be in the western portion of the Pennypack Trust. Most of you have probably seen it. It's that green ground cover that has taken over most of our watersheds and preserves. Has a little yellow flower as well. It has a tiny little root system that does almost nothing for rainwater. So yeah, I am just kind of guessing here, but it does seem like that since they have such a shallower root system, that they're able to take over a lot easier. That's just speculation, but it does seem to make sense. Can Ryan or Lindsay add to that?
I am no authority on the subject at all, but I will just say from what I understand conceptually about an invasive plant versus a non-native plant. Alex is asking about non-native plants, and there's a distinction between a plant that's not native but isn't invasive and one that's invasive, and even native plants can be invasive. And I think when we're talking about things that spread really widely and easily and get established and outcompete other things, those are invasive, and it's basically, yeah, they're outcompeting. They have whatever advantages that help them, spread widely and get started. So yeah, the lesser celandine, like you can pull that up. It's like less than 1/4 of an inch into the soil. So when you think about the big floods that come through and sweep the floodplain, those tiny little plants get plucked up and moved further downstream. It's just like a tiny little bulb. So those are very easily spread, and that's their advantage. That's why they're everywhere. So those are the ones that are invasive. They just have those little advantages, if we want to call them that.
Next question I see is there somewhere to go to get free native seeds?
So at TTF, we do, in the past, we have passed out Black-Eyed Susan seeds at different events that we table at. This year, we also have coneflower seeds as well that we're passing out as well.
So I guess we don't, besides TTF, I'm not sure if we have a answer for that. Free seeds, I'm not too sure.
Yeah, we used to have a plant sale, so it wasn't free, where we had native plants available. They weren't seed, they were already started, but and Pennypack has native plants.
Yeah. Later on in the presentation, we'll talk about where you can actually purchase native plants.
Mm-hmm.
As for seeds, I don't think we have an answer for that. So if anyone does, hit up the messaging, hit up the chat and let us all know.
Yeah.
I also asked a question, what else do birds eat besides seeds and worms? Because most people think birds eat seeds and worms. However, everything we're talking about tonight goes back to native plants. And as you've learned from Ryan, most native plants have an insect that is dependent upon that plant. And that's your answer. Birds eat insects, and they need a variety of insects to survive and support their young. So again, that goes back to native plants. I just think that's a really important thing to talk about when you're trying to bring habitat and water quality back to your own property.
Mm-hmm.
Key. Yeah,
So,
I just wanted to touch on that because I love native plants.
So before we end this sort of question session too, I sort of want to open a question to everyone. From the native plants that I talked about and showed you pictures of, are there any native plants that you're interested in planting in your yard, or you might already have planted in your yard? If you just want to respond in the chat.
And as
I
we were
think
saying,
bee-balm is popular.
bee-balm is popular. We will go in later. If you do actually want to put these in your yard, we'll show you later where you can purchase them.
I was mentioning earlier to Kevin and Ryan when we were working on this that we have some bee balm at the Watershed office, and we always cluster around in the summertime when we get a hummingbird at the bee balm. It's always exciting. Cool. All right, so people like the aster and the coneflower and the bee balm, Black-Eyed Susans. Okay.
Was that all the questions? I think it was.
Were there any other questions? Oh, what do you think about packets of mixed wildflower seeds or seed bombs?
I didn't see that.
And I have no idea on that one.
as for the mixed wildflower seeds, the Pennypack Trust, we got a grant 2 years ago. And that's exactly what we purchased. And we went to an area that was being mowed by one of our neighbors, even though it's not his property to mow, but he was mowing it for years. But then we kind of went back over, took control, and we planted one of those native plant seed mixes. And after 2 years, it was thriving. So last summer, it was one of the most beautiful wildflower fields I've ever seen. So yes, they do work. As for specific wildflower mixes to use, I'd have to talk to my horticulturist at the trust. And if you'd like his contact information, just privately message me and I'll give you that.
Julie says Ernst Seeds.
Good call, Julie. Thank you. That was the one I couldn't come up with, but Ernst Seeds is the place for seeds. I don't think they're free though. I don't want to put
Few
that in
things
anyone's
are.
head. Don't go yelling at Ernst Seed if they're not free. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
not free. But that is a good place to get locally sourced native plant seeds. Thank you, Julie.
All right, so moving on, we have a quick question for you guys. Type in the chat what you think the answer to this question is. What is the plant or crop that has the largest acreage of irrigated land in the country? So what is the biggest area of irrigated crop? Kevin says corn. Golf courses. Yeah. All right, you guys are smart. I was gonna take the title away from the slide or the picture, but I'm glad that you guys can take a hint. It is lawn by far, by far. Not that it's a crop, but over 40 million acres of the country is lawn. And we spend lots of time mowing it and fertilizing it and watering it and spending lots of resources on it. And it really gives us nothing, I guess, except aesthetic value. We're working on changing those aesthetic values. We're gonna keep working on you guys for that. So the best thing you can do, oh, and Ryan had talked about how thin and shallow the root system is for turf grass. So, you know, if you've ever ripped up a piece of sod, you know how shallow that thing is. It's really just a chunk. It has no deep roots. And so when it rains and water flows into your yard, it really doesn't soak up much water before, and you may know if you get a big saturating rain that your lawn is saturated. It's just kind of sheeting water. It can't soak up anymore. And so the best thing you can do is take lawn away. I know lots of people like lawn for recreational value. You can, you know, play soccer and football and whatever you want to do with your yard. But if everyone thought about how much of their actual front or backyard they use, and how much of it maybe they could convert to garden areas and meadow areas. I like this picture because when we talk to people about creating meadow, they assume it has to be 100% of their lawn must now be meadow, the whole thing. And I like that this is just the perimeter. So you can still have lawn area, and then you would, you know, plant this meadow area much the way people plant garden areas around the outside of their lawn. So, you know, you can literally rip up pieces of sod and plant in other stuff, garden or meadow. We have some meadows on our preserves. One of the favorites, staff favorite and public favorite, is Crossways Preserve, has a big meadow. I think what we use for that is like a warm season grass mix, and it might have some wildflowers in there. I don't really know what's in the warm season grass mix.
I can touch on that.
What's that?
Obviously, the Pennypack Trust has several warm season meadows, and most of what's in those meadows are little blue stem, big blue stem, and Indian grass. They're the top three warm season grasses that you would put into one of our meadows, at least.
And if people have questions and they want to convert some of their lawn to meadow, you can get in touch with us and we can talk to you about where you might get those grass seed mixes for your new meadow. The wonderful thing about meadow versus lawn, there are a million, but we consolidated it into just these few points. But one, it's lower maintenance. You're not mowing it. There's different maintenance, of course, involved with gardens and meadows, but you know, there's reduced maintenance in other areas. So because you would be using native grasses, again, you're not watering it, like you don't need the sprinkler on your lawn, you don't need to fertilize it, the meadow will do its own thing. You're increasing biodiversity, again, with those native plants like Ryan talked about, supporting all of the native wildlife that we want to sustain, the bugs and hummingbirds and other birds. It also, like we talked about, has a deeper root structure. So when the water is running off of your, you know, roof and sidewalks or whatever, if you have water running into a lawn versus running into a meadow, it's just such a better value, bang for your buck for your property. You're going to infiltrate all of that water and have a really diverse, wonderful habitat in your lawn. In your non-lawn. So questions, I see some activity in the chat. What was the percentage of lawn again? So it wasn't a percentage, it was a number, millions of acres of irrigated land. And I will go back to that slide. It was over 40 million acres of irrigated lawn. I pulled this image a couple years ago, so I'm sure it's more because people are developing and adding new houses in the country all the time. But yeah, far and away above all of the other irrigated cropland, which is kind of depressing statistic. What other questions do we have? Can you make any suggestions what will grow low and be acceptable to the city? That is a really, really good question. So if you live in a neighborhood with a homeowners association, this is a great thing to check what the rules and regs are on how tall your grass can be. It's also a good opportunity to educate your homeowners association on why maybe they could change their rule to be a little higher. Meadows are definitely something that people think will look unruly, but you can certainly mow it. You know, we mow our meadows twice a year. I don't know what is too often for a meadow, but we could, you know, get resources on that if you'd like to plant a meadow but want it, you know, want to mow it occasionally and look clean. But yeah, I'm not sure what grasses will grow low, but I know that there are, even if they don't grow low, there are some grasses that are trimmable the way that our turf grass is. Like you can mow it and it will be fine, but they're just native and they have deeper root structures. So we might do a little bit of research and get back to the group on what some good grasses to plant as a turf alternative would be. The group says clover, violet, wild ginger. That sounds super awesome and delightful. Okay, any other questions before we move on to our last section, I think?
All right. So this is one of my personal favorite sections of the PowerPoint. Because even if you live in an apartment building and you don't have any land and you don't think you can make any difference, you can. We can all make lifestyle changes that help the environment, will save you money. They're not necessarily managing stormwater at home, but many of these will help with that, but also the environment as a whole. So we have a list of 6 different things here that we're going to go into after this. But the number one thing that you can do that'll help the environment, reusables. For example, you know, water bottle. Everybody has one. At least in the bubble that we live in, we all have our own water bottles and we all have our own coffee mugs. I drink 5 of these a day, so that would be 5 plastic water bottles. You know, every 5 days, 25 bottles a week. I don't even want to know what that is a year. And there are still people that do that. Same with coffee mugs. I drink at least 1 or 2 coffees a day. I use my coffee mug. So that's one of the biggest things you can do is reuse, reuse, reuse. Find things that are reusable. Throwaway culture should be thrown away. We're tired of the throwaway culture, and that's just one simple thing you can do at home to make a difference. Number 2, another huge thing that we all stress is stop buying non-native ornamentals. I know we all wish they would just stop being sold in stores, but until we all put a lot of work in, that's not going to happen. So stop buying non-native ornamentals, and hopefully they will stop selling them. Some local places that you can go to are listed here. The Pennypack Trust obviously is the best one. I'm just kidding. They are all great. But the Pennypack Trust is one of the local ones that you can come to. I'm not sure how it'll work this year, but we do have them for sale pretty much throughout the year. Number 3 on that list is chemical usage. And we're going to go into detail about all 3 of those in later slides. And they're all pretty obvious as well. Most of them are reuse, 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 and clean up after them. So just reuse them. And we'll talk about that in a second. Number 4, don't litter. I was telling Lindsay and Ryan earlier that littering is not just throwing that water bottle out your window while you're driving. It's also throwing that apple core or that piece of food. Because when you throw that apple or that piece of food on the side of the road, a hawk or an owl is going to try to come eat that. And most of the time, unfortunately, they get hit by a car. And Lindsay and Ryan and I, we get calls about that quite a bit. And it's kind of sad. So littering even does count for that banana peel, that apple core. Just don't litter. Throw everything out where it's supposed to be or compost. At number 5, we wanted to ask you guys, what are some other little things that you can do at home or daily that help the environment? Does anyone have any examples of something they do at home that we could all?
Deborah has a very pertinent example of turning the water off while you're hand washing and singing happy birthday to yourself while you are decontaminating multiple times a day, every day.
Yes, so that's smart. Thank you, Deborah. Put the soap on your hands, rub it in, and on. Simple things like that. I was telling Lindsay and Ryan earlier that when I was in 3rd or 4th grade, the teacher got an empty gallon jug of water, put it under the tap, and turned it on. And she had us all count how long it take to fill that up. I think it was 20 to 30 seconds. And then she asked us to think about our showers. How long are we in the shower? And most of us are in the shower 5 to 10 minutes. And every single minute that we're in there, we're using however many gallons it is that you went to your tap and filled up that gallon. That's a really good lesson for anyone that has kids at home right now, just to teach the importance of how much water they're actually using. So that's a fun way to talk about with your kids and learn about how much water you're actually using. So just
Rita has a way to fight this problem. She says, don't shower for weeks. And that is very possible right now because you just don't have to leave your house and you don't have to be in anyone's company.
Yeah, my dog won't mind. So yeah, open discussion. Those were some really good answers.
Yeah.
Marking, don't shower for weeks, turn off the water. Julie took a shower for this webinar, but hopefully it was like a minute long. So she only used 3 gallons of water because she's great like that.
And Deborah also says you can compost at home, even in the city.
Ooh, that would be a good webinar, but we'll talk about that later. So open discussion, that was good. And then number 6, most of your suggestions went along with number 6. Use less water. Just be mindful of how much water you're using and wasting every day. Yeah. Great suggestions. Basically, we can all do better. And then that goes with everything you do at home. If you're one of the people that washes your car at home and does car repairs at home, make sure you're being responsible with everything you do. When you change your oil, collect it in a good container that can be recycled. Make sure you don't just toss that in the trash or toss it down the storm drain. Take it to somewhere that can dispose of that properly. Same with your batteries and everything else that happens on your car. One of the biggest things you can do is simply go to a car wash. Car washes are meant to handle that pollution that's coming off of your car. If you wash it in your driveway, all of that water and everything that was on your car gets taken directly to the storm drain and right to the creek. So just be responsible when you're fixing your car, doing work on your car, cleaning your car. Same goes with all of your other electronics and things you do at home. Just be mindful of what you're doing with it. Another thing that obviously Pennypack Trust, Wissahickon, and TTF are all involved in is the Winter Salt Watch. I see a couple names on the list of people who are in the webinar who are part of that. And the Winter Salt Watch is having citizen scientists go out to the creek and measure how much chloride is in the creek after certain snowstorms. This year it didn't snow that much, so we didn't have that much of a problem with it. But last year we learned that most of this comes from residential use again. So we can make a real big impact on how much chloride reaches the creek just by doing better at home. And as you can see on the slide, we have a couple suggestions of things that you can do at home. Shovel first. Throwing salt on snow does not do anything except really pollute the creek. So shovel first and then salt. And then after you have salted, or while you're salting, just use less. And then after the snow is melted and the salt and the ice is gone, reuse that salt. You don't have to just let it sit there. You can pick it up, put it back in the container, and use it again. So that saves money and helps the environment. Read the label. Make sure you're not putting anything worse into the creek that really needs to be there. And speak up. If you see your neighbor dumping piles of salt, go shake your fist at them, or simply just educate them. That usually works better. Deborah. Yeah, don't go shaking your fist at your neighbor. Try to be as polite as possible and just educate them. Like, hey, you're hurting the creek. You know why? Simple things like that. Just have a conversation. Talk to your family, your friends, and your neighbor. Then hopefully next year we all ramp it up and we talk to the townships and do a little bit of convincing there.
So I'm going to talk a little bit now about different ways that you can better manage your lawn that involve less harmful effects to the environment as well. So everybody wants that, perfect suburban green lawn, no brown spots, nicely mowed as well. A lot of people put fertilizer on it. You don't necessarily need to put fertilizer. So what happens with fertilizer is that it ends up in the creek in a lot of cases, and fertilizer can lead to things like algal blooms, and it can also raise other levels and affect some of the different life in the creek. So just a couple of different things you can sort of do there is you can use an organic fertilizer, or you can use compost on your lawn. Not raking up your leaves during the fall. The leaves break down. That's nutrients that are added to the soil there. Also, on the same token with the leaves too, the leaves end up blowing into our creeks and whatnot, and the leaves become the base of the food web during the fall. Macroinvertebrates and whatnot live in the leaf packs and eat the debris as it breaks down as well. And then also a sort of common sense thing to think about too, but if you are going to apply different fertilizers or other chemicals to your lawn, not to do it right before it rains. It's not very cost effective. It all washes right off. And when it washes off, it ends up going right to our creeks too, which is a big issue. And then also, just like Kevin said before too, speak up. If you see your neighbor who's using a bunch of fertilizer or different other harmful things, you can just tell them and say, maybe you could do it this way, and maybe they'll actually listen too. Maybe they just didn't actually know in the first place. So another thing that I'm going to talk about now too is everybody has pets. Everybody loves dogs. It's a great picture of a dog there. So dogs obviously poop. So pet waste is sort of an issue too. When pet waste gets into the water, it has like higher nitrate contents and adds more nitrogen to the water and causes issues with algae blooms and other things as well. So it's just being mindful that you pick up after your dog and other people pick up after their dogs, and you tell people if their dogs are pooping and they're not picking up, because also nobody wants to step in dog poop either. So if there's no dog poop, you can't step in it. But things you can do are you can flush the pet waste down the toilet using like flushable bags that are sort of like biodegradable. You can also use biodegradable bags to dispose of the waste as well. And like I said, just educating people and telling them, hey, you should kind of pick that up as well.
All right, so we are winding down. Just to recap, we recommended a bunch of different green infrastructure practices. So this is mimicking that green filter we talked about, using rain barrels, rain gardens, native plants to slow water down, let it infiltrate into the ground on your property, not directing it off your property into the stream. We recommended making sure you know what's going down the storm drains on your street, near your house, not letting, chemicals and road salt and motor oil and detergents and all the things that might wash off your property into the storm drains and into the creek. And we talked about different ways to reduce waste and reduce your water use. So of all of these techniques we talked about today, just message quickly in the chat, what is one thing you would commit to doing? You have lots of time at home now. So what's one thing you are gonna kind of tell yourself, I'm going to implement this change, or I'm going to get this native plant or something. So message us in the chat. Ready for spring planting? Heck yes. All right, everyone's on the gardening game. That's good. Awesome. So another reminder and plug for upcoming workshops. So we have the rain barrel workshop coming up and a rain garden workshop later in the year so that we can send around the links to again after the workshop. So lastly, we just want to sign off on saying that we talked about how much of the land area of all of our watersheds are taken up by residential area, single family homes. So each of us can do so much just at our homes. It feels like a small drop in the bucket, but if everyone does it, it makes a really big difference for all our land areas. But we also really want to encourage everyone to be a community advocate. And it sounds like we're going to get Deborah to lead a webinar on how to be a community advocate. So you should, reach out to whoever you can, whoever occurs to you. If you live in a neighborhood and you have an HOA, talk to them about, the length of the grass that you want to have cut. I'm not really promising that, Deborah. You don't have to do a webinar. Reach out to your school district. If your kid goes to school and you see how they're managing their lawns and property, talk to them. Your municipality, golf courses, a local business. Take all of the practices you're doing at home and just educate others and encourage them to do what you're doing. Show them how easy it is, give them resources and education. So at this point, we want to answer any questions. I'm going to scroll back up. Everyone's planting flowers, blah, blah, blah.
Deborah's got it. Send us money, help grants, volunteer, whatever you can do.
Absolutely. I think that anything that you're excited about is something that you can get others excited about. The enthusiasm is contagious. So if you're not into native plants, pick something else. If you feel really passionate about how much salt people are using, shake your fist at your neighbor. So whatever, tickles you, make sure that you spread that message in your community. That's really what we want. I think that all of our communities are made better by all of us getting educated and educating each other. So we really appreciate you spending all your time with us this evening. Hopefully it was cheering to see some other faces that aren't in your house right now. Just mix up your visual landscape. If anyone has any additional questions, now is the time. We'll answer some final questions. Deborah says that's Brendan Boyle and Julie, and that absolutely is one of their ribbon cuttings.
So yeah, the biggest thing you guys can do, as this whole presentation stressed, is it's a cultural change. Before, way back before I was born, and probably 100 years ago, everything was designed to get the water off your property and get it off your property as quick as possible. Times are changing and we need a cultural change to get rid of lawns, hold that water, recharge the groundwater, plant natives. We just need to do better, and that starts at home. That starts with each and every one of us doing better at home, and everything else we talked about. But try to make as many changes as you can with your personal life, day-to-day changes, and everything you can do at home.
Julie asks us to see if Kathy wants to talk about lobbying on Capitol Hill. So if you want to unmute yourself, if you want to join the discussion and you want to, chat with us, feel free. I want to put Kathy on the spot. See if she's unmuting herself. I don't see her unmuting herself. I'm going to answer this question about moss only because I have a love affair with moss. I love moss. And so I know that it doesn't have a root structure. It's like one of the first plants that evolved, and it's not the same as the rest of the plants. It's weird, and it's in the group with like lichens and weird things. I know, I'm a moss nerd. Thank you, Kevin. So it doesn't really filter, and it soaks up water in itself. It's like a tiny little layer of sponge, but it doesn't do the same job that roots do. It has no roots, but it's lovely, and I'm glad that your lawn is moss. Julie, feel free to unmute yourself. Do you want me to unmute you? Should I unmute Julie for her? She says she could talk about lobbying. All right, Julie, you're unmuted.
Right, and there's no video. I don't know why that is, but can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. So just when was it? Oh my goodness, it was the evening of March 9th and March 10th. Kathy Falso joined me in, oh, there I am, in going to Washington with the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed. So we went down and we met a bunch of other members from the coalition who were going to be lobbying on Capitol Hill for, you know, enhanced funding for the Delaware River Basin Commission and improved funding for the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. So it was a lot of fun, and we met with Congressman Boyle's staff and Congressman Evans' staff. Who else? Madeline Dean, Mary J. Scanlon, and it was fun because Kathy brought along stuff from her students for each congressperson that really connected with clean water and what they have learned about being stream keepers. And one of the things that was exciting was that we talked about two particular bills. One of them is the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is where TTF, you know, we recently got a master plan funded for Tacony Creek Park, and the Land and Water Conservation Fund at the federal level paid for that. The money goes from the feds to the state, and then this master plan process that we just got awarded with Parks and Recreation for the park was funded. So, you know, they love to hear about how the funding comes down locally. Hey, Kevin. So that was fun. And Kathy talked about some new legislation, some federal legislation that's been introduced about plastics, plastic bags, plastic bottles, all that plastic, and how her students felt about that. So she was very impactful because the staff was very excited that there was an actual teacher and not a staff person, and that she brought them gifts from her students that they would be able to share with their bosses and post in their office. It was very successful, and next year, you guys need to send people from your watershed organizations.
I will commit to that.
Oh, good. And, you know, a whole bunch of people just heard you say that, Lindsay. So
I know, I'm on the hook now.
good. It was fun, and it's really educational. And we just, you know, DC at that point, I mean, I think it was we just got out of there before things really just shut down.
Yeah.
But it was great. And there will be a blog posted. The Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed has posted a blog on their website, and TTF will repost that. And you can see some of the great pictures of Kathy with these staff members showing them the stuff from the kids.
That's awesome. Yeah, so I mean, clearly the people who are tuned in tonight are, of course, people who care and people who already volunteer and do a lot. The best thing we can ask you to do is just spread the word, expand, you know, the community of advocates. we are going to send around a follow-up email with, some resources. This webinar was recorded, so we will have, this recorded webinar for you to refer back to. And Rita just shared some photos from DC.
Oh,
If anyone wants to check it out.
Rita is amazing.
She is.
Oh, geez.
So again, thank you for spending your time with us. We are happy to, connect in this time where we're all home. If you have any suggestions for our organizations for more things that we can do to help people connect during this time, please let us all know. And thank you for joining us.
Can I jump in with one quick
please.
thing? So for everybody that's on the call, Lindsay and Kevin and Ryan pulled this together without a lot of time. And I think they did an incredible job. We didn't really want to cancel this workshop, and we wanted to try to figure out a way to do it for the people that were interested, like everybody who's on. So thank you. You did a great job.
Thank you guys. We have great colleagues. It's very easy and fun.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Well, we will be in touch. We will send an email around, and we have the webinar recorded. So thank you all for joining us. And we
Yes,
hope
thank
to
you
see
guys
you
for
again
joining us.
virtually.
Thank you, Rita, for helping us.
Yes, thank you.
For purchasing Zoom so we could do this.
Yes.
Absolutely.
All right. Catch you on the flip side.
Yeah.